All right, all right, all right, all right. Who does that? I think Matthew McConaughey does that. Thank you, everybody, for joining us today. Episode 3 of our Middle Mile Office Hours. So I appreciate you being here. My name is Stephen Gould, and I am the Senior Program Specialist here at the CBO. And so we're just here to talk about Middle Mile, answer some questions, and for those of you that have not joined us before, I'll just do brief housekeeping here, talk about the agenda real quick. So can you show that agenda? Next slide, Kristen. Thank you. Some brief housekeeping, no big deal. The middle timeline, frequently asked questions, some reminders, and a few changes that we made based on some of your questions and some changes we did to the portal. So we'll talk about that and answer any questions. See that we can wait till the end. I don't mind if you interrupt and, while the question is on your mind, feel free to chime in, raise your hand, put something in the chat, come off mute, whatever's best for you. So next slide, please. So just real quick, just want to remind you of the upcoming office hours. We got one more left after this session, and that'll be Thursday, June 25th at 10 o'clock. So please register in advance, and I think you already have if you're on here. But just so you know, that'll be the last one for this middle mile term here we're talking about. So be sure to do that. Please note that the CBO cannot provide any guidance that might be considered competitive advantage that will give you a competitive edge or advantage to any other prospective grantee. So that's very important. We have to be very careful about what we say to you and things like that. So questions regarding advanced local grants should be sent to advance_cbo@state.co.us. That's our address, email address is what I meant to say. So you can send questions through that, and that's okay too. Next slide, please. All right, so going through this timeline, we've done it before. As you know, the application portal is open. We're accepting applications for middle mile only. So just a reminder that we are getting close to that window closure date of June 29th. So just want to make you aware of that, and then we'll be starting our tier 2 process. So you can see here what happens when that window closes. We publish the intent to award list. We have an appeals window. Then we move from there to publish the challenge results if there are any. And then hopefully by October, if all goes well, we can execute grant agreements. So we're getting close, folks, to that window closing, and we're going to start looking at those middle mile applications and see what we got. So I'm really excited about that to see what that looks like. Next slide, please. This slide, I don't know, we should get rid of the slide. It's so hard to see, but really it's just talking about our frequently asked questions. So anything that we cannot answer here in this forum, we take note of it and we post it on our website with all the frequently asked questions. And you can go on the website. If you haven't done so, hopefully it hasn't been difficult for you to find where that resides at under resources. But you'll find the answers there under frequently asked questions. So, but hopefully in this forum here, we can address a lot of that. So next slide, Kristen. So these are just quick reminders that when you are preparing to do that application, and the same thing is going to apply if you, submitted application with any of the other tiers, last mile, short term, or whatever it may be, that you prepare accordingly before you begin the application, meaning you have all your documentation gathered. you've gone to our website, you've read through our lovely guidelines and addendums and so forth, because there's so much information contained in them, more than I could possibly remember myself, and tell you about it in these types of forums, because it's just a lot of information. Um, and so, when doing so, you'll probably have questions. You might see some inconsistencies or whatever, and we want to know about that. So, let us know what you find. But review the relevant documents, gather all relevant information. That means any certificates or documents that are going to be needed to be uploaded. Gather all that stuff, have it ready, prepared as you work on your application. Um, Check the minimum requirements and the criteria, because we do have a score based system. So you want to make sure that you understand what's going on there. This is very important. When you upload those your information, make sure that you've got the right naming conventions for those documents, so that when myself or anybody is reviewing these documents, we know what is what, and we don't have to just keep clicking on everything and trying to figure out what is what. So the naming conventions are very important. And there's a workbook that we've designed that you can download and start working on that. It asks for a lot of financial information, and it's basically demonstrating your sustainability, what your financial situation is, stuff we need to know. But I'm sure you're going to have questions about it. But before you go editing that document, please check with us, because it does contain a lot of formulas in it. So if you have a lot of things that need additional lines or columns or what have you, just let us know and we'll fix the document for you and get it back to you, and you can proceed. But as of yet, haven't heard anything. Maybe somebody might bring that up in the discussion today. And then just make sure you upload the correct file format. And actually, that's not a big deal, because if you don't, the system won't let you go any further. So you're probably either looking at a PDF. Most of the things you'll upload will be PDF, and you might upload some Excel documents. I know the workbook is an Excel document. Um, so really, those are the only two formats that you need to be aware of. And you'll let us know if you run into any other issues there. Next slide, Kristen. So here's just a few changes that we've made, and just I said answers plural, but I'm going to answer one of your questions that came in. But we have got some pushback about that. Well, I don't want to say pushback. We got some valuable feedback about one of our requirements, and that was the CPCN certificate. And after that person brought that to our attention, made a really excellent case of why it was something that we didn't need. We reviewed it, and we decided, yeah, it wasn't something that was needed. So we removed that requirement completely. And the CPCN is the Certificate of Public Convenience and Necessity. So we totally took that requirement out. It's no longer needed. If you did fill out an application and it was on there at the time, and you uploaded it, we'll just disregard it, and it won't harm anything or disqualify you or take away any points or anything like that. It's completely gone, not relevant anymore. One of the other things we found out was happening is that people could not move forward with the VSS number. They were having some problem because it requires 16 digits, and people couldn't move forward, couldn't put that information in. They got stuck on that. So I think we resolved that issue. I haven't heard anything otherwise that it wasn't resolved. So I'm thinking all is good on that aspect. So, but if you are still having problems with that, please let us know, and we'll dive into it and get that all squared away. But I think it's resolved. So, and then lastly, a question came up about multiple applications. Will the system allow you to work on multiple applications? The answer is yes, it will. But what you have to do is save whatever application you're working on. You have to hit the save for later button, and then go back to apply for funding and start a new application. and then you can kind of toggle between those applications that you're working on. So the answer is yet. Um, and I think that's all we have in terms of noteworthy changes and the questions that came in. But I also want to let you know that although we got rid of the CPCN requirement, we still need the certificate of good standing. That's going to be very important. That is a requirement that we could not get rid of. We still need it. So with that, I am going to open up the floor. And I think we do have some super team, CBO super team members on here. Our AG and our my boss, Brian Martin, and we'll try to answer your questions here. So, how can I help you today? Okay, thank you all for attending. And do I hear?
All right. Sorry about that, Stephen. One quick question. We just wanted to clarify if the dollars could be used towards equipment used to monitor or manage a network, or if they're exclusively for construction of a network.
I believe it's format for construction only, but is there a super team member on here that might want to take that question on, Judd or Brian? And we only have two super teams today, but um, Judd, you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, this is for construction only, not operational or maintenance. So one-time costs, basically, one-time construction costs.
Yep,
Okay.
and I thought so, but just wanted to make myself feel better and not give any wrong answers there. So, does
Yeah.
that answer your question?
Yeah, it does. And if the equipment would be just a one-time equipment cost, would that change the answer? Or is the stipulation, um, you know, OpEx versus CapEx, or is the stipulation equipment versus construction?
Yeah, it's CapEx.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Thank you. Do we have anything in the chat? I haven't seen my chat thing.
Hi, this is Ashley. I had a question. I had submitted a question that received a response in the FAQ just with respect to having a county applicant partnering with an ISP and the county serving as the lead applicant with the ISP as a partner. I'd asked about financial documents required of the ISP, just because the applicant is required to provide, 3 years of audited financials. We were trying to figure out if the ISP would. If the ISP has 3 years of financials, but they're not audited, are we able to submit those with like a justification of why we don't have audits, or would that be a problem?
Yeah, I think you still should submit it, and
Okay.
I think if you have justification, we can take a look at that justification and move from there because it could be something totally valid. So it would be something we would probably take on a case by case and really kind of look at that and make a determination. But yes,
Okay, understood. Thank you.
you're welcome. I saw another hand. I think I saw Allison raise your hand.
Yeah. Hi, this is
Allison,
Mayank from Zayo. I had raised my hand
oh,
earlier.
okay.
Yeah, so my question is somewhat related to the previous questions about CapEx versus OpEx. Uh, I see the spreadsheet that is provided requires operational costs to be added in as well. Now, if we are expecting the project to be financially sustainable and we're not asking for any operational costs, do we still need to provide costs related to the project?
Yeah, I think you're right that we require that information just so that we can see that it's going to be sustainable. So you're not building a network that is going to go bankrupt, basically.
Absolutely. And similarly, it also asks information high level on the revenue side.
Mhm.
Uh, would the revenue need to capture long-term IRUs, upfront payments? Because sometimes these are not operational revenues. These are, revenues that would be accrued in future, but uh, those are some things which are still kind of not very clear.
Yeah, I think all your long-term IRUs should be included. Um, I'll take that offline though. I don't know what line item that is, but maybe we can clarify where that goes.
Yeah, thank you. Because as I was saying that there's only one revenue line item, it does not really break it down into IRUs. So we weren't sure on where to add those. So that'll be helpful. That clarification would be very helpful.
Okay. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you for that question and the previous question. Um, let's see.
There is a question in the chat from Shaq
Okay.
Powers, and I can read that off. This is good morning. Do you have a requirement to upload a high-level network? Or sorry, good morning. You have a new requirement to upload a high-level network design package summary. If we are seeking funding for an IRU on existing fiber, is the task order enough for this? Or do you need an as-built? Or what would suffice for for an IRU request? So yeah, I think he's asking about what level of detail do we need if they're seeking funding for an IRU on existing fiber. Judd, I can weigh in here and just say
Yeah.
I think we need as much as possible, sort of everything on the existing fiber, and then what is an add-on. But go ahead if you can help assist with that.
Yeah, I don't have any more comments on that. Oh, Shaq, maybe you can clarify your comment.
Yeah, so there's a requirement to upload high-level network design, but
Mhm.
if you're not designing anything, if you're purchasing something that already exists with the funding, what do you want to satisfy that requirement?
On the high level design, can you show us that IRU then?
Well, yeah, we can show you a map of where the fiber is, although I would say that'll be possible for sure with the IRU we're seeking, but like other IRUs we have, like from Tri-State, we have to sign a non-disclosure agreement and to see where their paths are. So some of that gets a little bit tricky. So my question is, if it's not a design, if it's purchasing existing infrastructure, what level of detail do you need?
Yeah, if you can show us the path,
Okay.
that would be great. If there is an NDA question or an NDA issue, I mean, maybe you can describe it, it goes from here to here, point A to point B.
Okay.
Does that make sense, Shaq? It sounds like I know you
Yeah, yeah.
nodded and said
I'm just
okay.
Yeah, I'm just obviously there's not going to be design for something that already exists. So
Right,
we may
right.
not have access to all the as-built or whatever, but you just need something that will give you a visual representation of what it is and where it is.
Yeah, I think
That
that's right.
sounds what Judd is saying. Yes.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Help us connect the dots. So this is all new territory for us as well. So it's the more you can be as helpful as you can for us, the better. That's great in helping us connect the dots. So yeah, good questions though. And as we have these office hours and these questions come up, I am learning a lot from you all as well. So the questions are much appreciated. Any additional questions? Hey,
I
Craig.
do. Oh,
Oh, I saw Craig's hand go up, so we'll take Craig and then we'll take the next person there.
sure.
Hey, Stephen.
Hey,
I have a question about capable microwave links, so wireless middle mile. The the grant program guidelines and the middle mile addendum both say that the middle mile infrastructure must use fiber optic technology, but it comes short of what past state or federal programs have said with end-to-end fiber optic technology. So, is that just an omission, or is that an allowance for having a microwave link for middle mile that is connected to newly constructed fiber. So it's not end-to-end fiber, but it does use fiber optic technology.
Greg, why you do this to me?
Yeah,
Ask these brilliant questions. These that
That
in
is
our
a
maybe.
great question. Yeah. John, go ahead.
Well,
Craig, I think in our discussions and in crafting that addenda and the whole program, we had in mind end-to-end fiber. But I think let us take that back. I think that's really almost a brandy level question because yeah, other technologies could be used and are quite efficient in certain segments, but I think that's a brandy question we'll have to take back.
yeah,
I think
and
we'll post it in the FAQ.
and there's a shout out in the FAQ to free space optics for connecting CAIs. And that's a technology that's come a long way.
Hmm.
Microwave, 10 gig microwave full duplex is mainstream
Hmm.
for long shots. High availability. You have the free space optics. Then you also have laser links. Laser links, in space connecting Starlink. And so I think 100 gig non-fiber is very much a thing, and it's just how you want to interpret the must use versus end to end. So yeah,
Yeah,
thank you for
to
having a chat on
clarify
that.
that,
Oh,
I think one thing we were trying to get at too was we were not looking to fund LEO really. So other technologies like free space optics we contemplated. So maybe we can add that one to the microwave.
Well, or add microwave to the free space optics, yeah. But
Yeah.
but but yeah, if you think about, the what's left in Colorado, there's a lot of remote areas, there's a lot of Forest Service areas, there's a lot of hilltops, and you can hit a link and then have that go down valley to serve middle mile or last mile in the next round. But that link is only accessible through microwave in a lot of places because Forest Service doesn't want you digging things up, and it may not be feasible at all. So if you guys could consider that, that add clarity.
Yeah, we'll consider that. Great.
Thank you.
yeah, thank you, Craig. It's a great question, and it's a high-level question that deserves a high-level answer. So, Judd, thank you for chiming in and providing some guidance on that. But it sounds like something to take back to Brandy. So, high-level question, high-level answer. So, stay tuned. Hey, Nate, you got your hand up. How you doing?
All right. How are you this morning?
I'm doing good, Nate. What's going
Oh,
on?
good. Hey, I just had a point of clarification. I know that, and I put this in the chat as well. Um, During the conversation last week in Brandy's presentation, she she implied that there were almost going to be two separate considerations in terms of middle mile. There's the projects that um, I know I've heard talked about during these conversations, and some of the conversations I'm having with my local municipalities about local um, middle mile connections versus the larger middle mile. And what I had heard in Brandy's comment was she was thinking that perhaps there would be funding from a different source for the existing cogs that have networks. Are you looking for it, or would you consider applications from the existing cogs that are looking to build out the statewide middle mile to solve problems statewide? That would be that would almost be considered as part of the larger project, or is your intent more to fund some of those other more local projects that DOLA was more primarily focused on? I just don't want us having to spin our wheels if it's not appropriate. I don't want to waste your time, and I don't want to take our time. Um, putting in an application if Brandy has other thoughts on where funding for like Project Thor out of Northwest Con should be coming from.
I think, Brian, I think that question might be more suited for you as someone that has the most contact with Brandy and speaks with you, Brandy, on a regular basis, regarding her direction or her vision that she sees. So if you don't mind chiming in on Nate's question,
Yeah,
that'd be
no,
great.
that's I think, this first grant cycle that we're running, we have a nice pot of cash to play with. So I think we want to make sure we're having the biggest impact. I don't necessarily think it's at this time one over another. I think we're working to launch the middle mile program for CBO, and we're also launching advanced local. So I think it's a little bit up to you as to how you want to apply. If there's um, particular things you think could have a major impact, then we would encourage you to apply to this. But if you're not sure and you'd like to kind of see what the land looks like, then that would be up to you to apply at another stage. I do anticipate the middle mile program being launched by CBO to have funding resources available, but it's a little bit up to you as to how you want to make that approach. So, but it feels like COGS. Um, should be something that are eligible. So I'd have to go back and look at that. And perhaps if it helps, we can make it address this in the FAQs.
Yes, that would be helpful. Brian, thank you.
Yeah,
You're welcome.
Thank you, Stephen.
Nate, I would say both. You could do both. I think this is a new program. We are going to look at all of the applications, whatever you think is the best bang for buck. The the CBO middle mile program that's kind of muddling the waters here a little bit is more of a state-run, state-owned network. This middle mile program, you're going to get a grant and then you own it. You own the COG owns it, or the Thor or one of those entities owns it, owns the network. Under the state one, the CBO, or we've talked about enterprises, things like that, could own it, or CDOT, already owns their own fiber, but they just lend it to the state for this state program. But I think you could apply, for the local middle mile or pieces or segments of the middle mile that fit into the wider state focus. But you would own it under this program because it's a grant.
Okay, very good. Hey, thank you for the clarification. Appreciate
Yep.
it.
Thank you, Nate. So what I think I'm hearing is nothing is off the table there. So there you have it. Allison, you got your hand up. How can I help you?
Hi, good morning.
Good
Can you hear
morning.
me okay?
Yep.
Yeah.
Great. Okay, so I have a quick question. I know that you put the middle mile timeline up earlier, that more has to do with application window openings and closings and execution of the agreement. But I was curious, are there any defined project completion deadlines, or, should applicants assume that completion timing is based on the proposed project schedule? Is there a funding exhaustion timeline, so to speak? Like where funds are no longer, um, you know, available, like they're exhausted. I hope I'm making sense.
Yeah. So it sounds like what you're asking is, do we have a more detailed timeline that kind of is a little more robust and kind of fills in those gaps, is what it sounds like. Is that correct?
Yes, yeah, around the project
Uh,
completion and funding
I,
exhaustion.
I, yeah, I think we do. Brian, can you speak to that? Because I know we've talked about timelines so many times, and I know you've worked on the timeline, but do we have it a more defined timeline and processes posted anywhere that you're aware of and I might not be aware of? But
Yeah,
Um,
I put it in the
Go ahead,
chat
Judd.
actually. Um, so the current expenditure end date, it's in the grant agreement. So there's a draft of the grant agreement out there on the resources. and it's listed as September 1st, 2030. So things would have to be expended by 2030. But I think for on a per grant basis, the CBO and the grant agreement will probably list or go off of whatever your proposed timeline is in your proposal.
Okay. Very good. Thank you.
Super team, you're amazing. Thank you. Eric, you got your hand up. What's going on? Hey, Eric.
Sorry.
Oh no, oh, there is Eric. Hey, Eric.
Yeah, hi, Stephen. Thank you. So this being a new grant for all of us, um, there's probably some items that are going to be impossible to address of applicability just in the documentation in their entirety. And we don't have any past precedents to know like what or what hasn't, gone through in the past since this is a new grant. So I was wondering if there's besides on the capex versus opex argument, if things are at least in the capex category, there's many things that are besides just uh, purchasing an IRU for a long-term access to a fiber construction that have to do with middle mile, and they have to do. Sometimes they can be just as expensive to implement and run as the fiber itself, or like I was saying, a microwave tower itself, and that has to do on the fiber with the optical equipment, the routers, the other things that really make the network work, and even some other ancillary items that are supporting that network or the extension of a network. I'm not directly applying. Archuleta County myself aren't, but I'm supporting several other cog-based applicants that are. So I'm just thinking in terms of their needs. We're intending to put down some of these items that seem like there's no prohibition against them, but I wondered what, and here's where the question finally comes. I wonder if it's, I don't want to feel like we're walking on eggshells that, well, like, oh, we could put one of these items in that we say, yeah, it's very necessary for running this network, but it turns out that it's determined to be non-applicable or non-fundable, so the entire application gets thrown out with it. Will you guys kind of look at that since this is new to say, well, yeah, we're going to fund this, but we're not going to fund that. You need to take this out of the application. Will there be that kind of give and take with the applications when they're reviewed?
Yes, definitely. We definitely have to review these applications and to see what's allowable and what's not allowable. So yeah, there definitely has to be that back and forth happening in terms of what the budget looks like and what you're asking for and is it allowable. So yes, you can expect some sort of back and forth with the process for sure.
Yeah, and Eric, you can look at the addendum for middle mile, and right at the top, it's different than all the other addendums, but what we added a section called substantial involvement, and that's exactly for this reason because we haven't done these before. We don't know what's going to come in the door. We don't know what the line items should look like and what's allowable, what's not allowable. So I would include, things that like an IRU or something like that. And then we contemplated kind of going back and forth and removing things from the budget if it needs to be removed or figuring a different way to do it. So that's what that section of the middle mile program in particular calls out is this substantial involvement with the CBO. So it'll be back and forth.
Mhm.
Well, thank you.
Does that help, Eric?
Yes, thank you, Stephen and Jed.
Yeah.
And thank you, Jad, for that additional information on that. Appreciate that. I thought I saw somebody else's hand or anything else in the chat, or is there? I'm curious to know if those of you that have started putting your applications together and are in the portal, how is it going for you? Does it flow okay? Is it making sense? Is it what kind of issues are you running into, if any? Does anybody want to give any feedback on it? Because it's an ongoing thing. We're going to be still making tweaks, and it's a new system. And I'm curious what the experience has been if anybody is in there. It's perfect. It's good.
I would say that the guide that goes along with the portal is very helpful. Um, it would be nice if you could skip through all the sections and look at them briefly without having to complete the previous section. If you could, um, move forward, take a good look. But I think the guide that goes with it is adequate for that. But that would be my only constructive criticism. Since you have the guide, it's not terrible. You know what's coming next.
Thanks, Shaq. Appreciate that feedback, and definitely we can take a look into that because we things still have to be tweaked and all those kind of things, especially as we get into the next tier, things like that. So the feedback is valuable. Shaq, have you had a chance to, be looking at the addendums and the guidelines and stuff? Have they been helpful for you, or um, in terms of a resource for information?
Yeah. They have been. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you for that. Anybody else their experience with the portal and how it's going so far?
I saw the FAQ response on copying your links for working on multiple at once and kind of jumping between them. Any headway on having a landing page that has them linked instead of keeping track of your own links?
I mean, I gotta be honest. I don't think we're gonna have that in time for this, unfortunately. But we have flagged it as something to confirm for the next cycle. So no, I'm sorry. I know it's not the most ideal situation to have play out, but we're gonna work on fixing that for the next cycle. So unfortunately, that's the protocol we have to follow at this time. So thank you for your patience on it.
And do you anticipate the portal changing for future rounds, or is this solution, this GUI, kind of going to be where you're building from going forward?
So, I don't want to make any changes in the cycle unless we absolutely have to during the application process. This is kind of our baseline to work off of, and then, I think the plan is to take on feedback after this cycle is concluded, and figure out what we can do to make this more relevant, more helpful. Fix some of the UX issues if there are any, which I think there's probably quite a few to work through. So we're working off this baseline model, and then as we expand into future cycles, we'll tweak as necessary to make sure the process is relevant and helpful for everyone who's involved.
Okay,
So we do want feedback on these. So yeah, I appreciate Stephen bringing this up. It is definitely something we want to track and make sure, much like we did with the broadband deployment board, we did make tweaks throughout when it was appropriate. So yeah, please let us know if it's working for you or if it's not working for you, and we want to make sure it does. So thank you.
Yeah, and you can send those questions through the advanced local email. So or reach out to me or whatever. Anybody else want to share anything or any additional questions? We got about 15 minutes or so. So just want to make sure that accommodate everybody and get your feedback. The questions are always great. I greatly appreciate them. And while waiting to see if any other questions come in, just a reminder that this cycle for Middle Mile will close on the 29th of June, and we'll start getting into our review process and going from there. And at the same time, hopefully, fingers crossed, I think so, rolling out our tier 2. We're going to have a webinar on that tier 2 in the upcoming weeks. So you'll be hearing about that. And it'll be the same sort of situations where we do the webinar and we do the office hours for tier 2. So stay tuned for that. If there are not any more questions going once, going twice, and seen. Okay, everybody, thank you so much for joining us. Thank you, Super Team, for all your help. And oh, wait, is there something in the chat? I see. Has everything been answered in the chat?
It looks like it. I don't see
Yeah.
anyone else. Unless
Okay.
anyone has anything else, go ahead and ping us. But sorry, Stephen, carry on.
Nope. So then I'm going to wrap up there and thank you all for the wonderful questions. And don't forget the next webinar is on the, not webinar, office hours is on the 25th. All right. So looking forward to seeing you all there. Thank you and have a fantastic day. Thank you all.
Thank you.